Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right here on DZRJ and RJTV. My name is Lecain. We are talking about some of the most interesting stories that happened in the world this week. And join with me, as always, is Sir Dan Kang. Sir Dan Kang in what looks to be a beautiful place there. Dan Kang, we always ask where in the world is Dan Kang. Where is Dan Kang this week on the show? Dan, where are you?
Today I am in the middle part of Korea, down at near the U.S. Army base in Asan Pyeongtaek, Camp Humphreys, U.S. military Army base.
I guess that's a good place to be.
Yeah, it's okay. It's not bad. I actually have a motorcycle contract over here, so I'm here frequently. Yeah.
All right. Well, good place to be there. Now, I, on the other hand, am here in Manila with where are most of our listeners today. And in the Philippines, before we get started with the news, there is some very exciting stuff going on here in the Philippines. I guess Dan, I'm sure you do, that the new Barbie movie is coming out soon. And we are all very, very excited about this movie. Barbie and Ken have been cast out of Barbie Land, and they are on a journey of self-discovery. However, there's been a lot of controversy with this movie. The Philippines has been trying to decide whether to ban this movie from the Philippines or not. Vietnam has already banned it from showing in their country because there is a scene in the movie, in the background, there is a crayon drawing of the world. And in that drawing, in the South China Sea, there is what looks to be what might maybe be a 9-dash line. The line that that China puts on its maps to justify its territorial claim to the majority of the South China Sea.
Yeah.
So that's very controversial there. The people who made the producers of the movie, Warner Brothers, has made a statement that it's just supposed to be a child's crayon drawing, not meant in any way as a political statement.
So what is it saying? That it's got Philippines and Vietnam, everybody in China or outside of China?
No, you don't see. I can't even tell. I saw it. I looked at it. I can't. It's such a mishmash. It's not even. It's not even the correct world drawing. It's just at some point you see a big blotch that says China, and then there's a little line drawn to the side of it, a little dotted line. But there has been, calls for the Philippines to ban this movie from being shown in the Philippines because of that controversial drawing in the background. But the Philippines has taken a different approach. They have said that the drawing in the background, and believe me, this is in the background of the movie, they have found it to be cartoonish. In a statement from the Philippine Movie Television Board, they have said, considering the context by which the cartoonish map of the character Weird Barbie was portrayed in the film, the review committee is convinced that the contentious scene does not depict the 9-dash line.
Wait till they blow their minds with getting the Barbie doll, looking on the back and seeing "Made in China."
Made in China. Made in China.
The era of the outrage. This is almost good for the movie. I think more people will go see the movie now than people
just to see the 9-dash line. One interesting fact: the Philippines has asked the Warner Brothers company to please blur the lines on the map to avoid other misinterpretations.
Oh boy. We're in the era of outrage.
I mean,
do they have South Park? Did they have South Park in the Philippines? Because boy, if they watch that.
Man, it just reminds me because, the Little Mermaid movie just came out, and that was a big problem because, as everybody knows, mermaids are not black. Yeah. They are white.
That's right.
And why they decided to make a black mermaid, I don't know. Caused all kinds of controversy. But that movie was in the Philippines, because in the Philippines they don't seem to mind so much with that. But Dan, speaking of the United States, I wanted to talk about this one story. Now, we don't do a lot of local news. We mostly do international news here. But I wanted to, just because I found this story just so fascinating. And the title of it, when you read it in the newspaper, it's called "The Demon That Walks Among Us." And it is about, you might have heard about it because it was all over the international news for a while. Over 10 years ago, an incredible whodunit mystery on 𝗥𝗲𝗽𝗆 Beach in Long Island. Now, I used to live in Long Island, so I know where this beach is. 11 bodies were buried on the beach in burlap bags. Now, the focus has been on four girls that they found since 2010. They became known as the 𝗥𝗲𝗽𝗆. And all these women were in their 20s. They were all prostitutes with ads on Craigslist. The thing that makes this whole thing so weird and gruesome was that one of the families of the girls got multiple taunting calls after her disappearance saying how he had killed their daughter, saying, "Do you think you'll ever see her again? You won't, because I killed her." Ooh, just really, really. But as it turns out, this week, anyway, there were calls that after 2010, just to recap here, there were more bodies found. It turns out that this was a serial killer who was killing girls out there on Long Island and putting the bodies on the beach as far back as 1996. So what the police did, this phone call that he made, sometimes criminals are just stupid. He made these calls taunting these people. So they took the number of the phone, and it was a burner phone, and they pinpointed it to thousands of phones, and then hundreds of phones, and then a few phones, and eventually a phone, and where it came from, and eventually a picture of a CCTV camera of a large man buying a phone. And once they found this guy, they put him under surveillance, and they waited. And they waited and they waited, and eventually he threw out a pizza crust. And they compared the DNA of a hair sample from one of the burlap bags where one of the dead girls was to that pizza crust. Wow. And they figured out that it was him. And so they started following this guy around, and it turns out he worked right near where the cell tower was, where the burner cell phones were used. He matched the description of someone that saw him with one of the girls. The vehicle that he used to pick up one of the girls, turns out it was tied to him. And so this past week, they arrested him. And they went to his house. And they opened his computer, and he'd always remove your searches because he did not do that. And he had 200 searches on the 𝗥𝗲𝗽𝗆 investigation, and multiple searches on the victims and looking at pictures of the victims and their families. So, the interesting thing about this, Dan, is, the title of the story in the paper was "The Demon That Walks Among Us," because he's an architect. He's an architect that works in Manhattan, lives in Long Island with his family, with his wife and his kids. Just a regular, normal guy.
Right. You cannot deny the power of the pizza. You can't.
Pizza crust. He threw away a pizza crust, and they dug it out of the trash and took his saliva off the pizza crust.
Straight out of the CSI forensics show.
Man, wow. I was gonna say these detectives watch a lot of CSI this thing went cold for 13 years, and part of the reason that it went cold was, and there's a lot of criticism for this, is because it was prostitutes. They found dead prostitutes, and so they're like, we're not going to pay that much attention. And there was an issue with the guy who was running the police department at the time and running the investigation. So, but anyway, they pieced the whole thing together. And this week they finally arrested this guy, and they brought this guy out in handcuffs. And when they brought him out, man, is he big. He's a huge guy, 6'4", 280 pounds. He's a big guy. But they said that they finally arrested him because they thought that he might be a danger to society.
Well, yeah, but you think?
You think they thought that he might kill again. So
they
have brought him. They have finally got this guy in jail.
he probably stopped with the introduction of all the forensic investigation science that started. So,
Yeah, he finally realized. He's probably like, hey, you know what? I probably should have like cleaned up a little better.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. That's true. Back in 2010, we probably did not, think about
we didn't have that
how many, they're going to get DNA evidence off of my.
Sure.
There might be a hair sample. They even found, because they were burlap bags, they even found like some of his wife's hair in it. Now, she's not a suspect, but I mean, she had, been using the bags and dropped a hair. You just don't know. You can't come in and leave a room without leaving some kind of evidence, some skin cell, something's going to drop.
I mean, even the oil on your fingers, skin, not anymore.
I know.
Our technology is so advanced now with that. So it's all about the money, though.
I realize now that if I'm going to murder somebody, I need to get me a full body suit with the gloves and the mask and the
Dexter. Dexter.
Like that show Dexter. But moving on from that, there's another problem going on around the world right now, especially in the United States, but this is in a different country. This is in Europe. Migrants coming into your country. I mean, we have the same problem here in the Philippines. There's an issue in the Philippines about Chinese people coming in. But there was an issue that came up in the news this week about a tragedy of, so many migrants trying to get a better life. They have a horrible life in their country, and so they're trying to get to a different country to, help their families, whatever. So there was a ship that was crossing the Mediterranean. Now, these ships cross the Mediterranean all the time trying to get to Europe. And this one was full of Pakistani migrants. They were on their way from Libya to Italy to maybe have a better life. There were 750 people on board, and the boat was designed for about 100 people. So if you can imagine that. And somewhere along the way, it capsized. The big question, of course, is how it capsized. They think it was after the authorities had shown up. And if the authorities had not done what they did, this boat might not have capsized. But that's neither here nor there. But of the 750 people that were on the boat, 104 people survived. And there's a story that came out about this, about a young boy, a 14-year-old, whose family sent him on this boat. His father sold the house to pay the smugglers to get him to Italy. The family was starving, and they sent their son to Italy to save the family. However, the son has not been heard from since the boat capsized. As father said, he was the smartest kid in his class, and he made TikTok videos. And but Dan, it was $9,300 to smuggle this child to Italy. And the smugglers told the father it was a big ship, it's and it turns out they jam them in there. They jam them in the top and the bottom and the very bottom. It's a 5-day journey. It's 5 days to get across the Mediterranean. They run out of water. They run out of food. There's fights. I mean, it's just horrible. Trying to just make a better life for your family.
Yeah, I mean, I remember during the Vietnam, after the Vietnam War, or during that as well, when the Vietnamese were taking, I mean, can you imagine a boat trip from Vietnam to the U.S.?
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's months. That's months.
Cambodia, Vietnam, and I think there was a lot of outrage on of that, because that happens a lot, actually, a lot more than people know. And part of the outrage was when the submarine that the one that that imploded, when that was such big news, and then these people are like, well, yeah. Meanwhile, the whole world is standing still over 5 million millionaires. Meanwhile, thousands of people are dying on boat capsized.
I know.
Trying to escape the country. So there was a lot of outrage between those two in the press. And that's, it's really unfortunate. That happens a lot. It happens a lot.
Yeah, a lot more than we think. This one made big news because so many people died. I mean, 750 people on the boat. They only pulled 104 people out of the water. So this made some big news. But in general, these boats are always trying to get across the Mediterranean, and they flip over or they don't show up. I mean, if we probably scoured the bottom of the Mediterranean, And it's true. A lot of it has to do with it's not reported a lot because it's not billionaires on the boat, which is it's the same criticism that they got in the previous story about the girls that were killed in Long Island. They're like, if those girls killed in Long Island were from very rich families and whatever, this would have been a huge investigation, but they really weren't. They were just poor, prostitutes. So it kind of fell by the wayside, which is, an unfortunate thing. But what I find interesting, Dan, is, people around the world are trying to get to the United States. They're trying to get to Europe for a better life, to work and send money back to their homes because they're starving, which is something and I've read this multiple times. It doesn't even need to be. There really doesn't need to be starving people in the world. Yeah,
actually, there's enough resources worldwide. There's just not enough unity.
I know. There's just not enough unity. That's the issue.
Yeah,
we need the space aliens to come down and take us over and set us straight and start feeding everybody. I wish they would have talked about this in Lithuania, because Lithuania this week, not that we're transitioning here, but there was a big meeting this week at Vilnius, am I saying that right? Vilnius, Lithuania. It was a big one. It was a big meeting. It was because at this meeting, they did exactly what Putin's war was supposed to prevent. It was the expansion of NATO. It was the big NATO meeting this week, and they did exactly what Putin has been fighting for them not to do. They expanded NATO, and now Finland is an official member of NATO. One of the largest bordering countries of Russia is now a member of the NATO alliance.
That's right. Yeah. And Finland has always been a bit, in the middle.
Finland never wanted to join NATO. They never wanted to join NATO.
Never needed to, really.
They never had any intention of joining NATO, and now it's just because of the war. It's because of the war in Ukraine. That is the reason. And one of the big subjects in the big NATO meeting they had was the approval of Sweden in NATO. Another country never had any intentions ever. They want to always stay in the middle. They did not want to pick one side or the other. And now they want to join NATO. And of course, we were talking about this last week. The membership was being held up for a while with Turkey, who've been blocking them from entering NATO. And now Turkey's president, who has always been alluded as a friend of Putin, is now saying, okay, all right, I give up. Yeah, Sweden should be a member of NATO. I'm like, oh my goodness. So Sweden's going to join up now. Probably at the next meeting, Sweden will be a member. And, people have always, Ukraine was at this meeting and they demanded, they want to be a member of NATO. They're like, we should be a member of NATO. There's been a little bit of pushback on that. The British Defense Secretary said, you should just be grateful for what you've gotten so far.
Yeah.
It's kind of true. I mean, everybody's, the United States, they've given Ukraine a lot of guns and a lot of bullets, and they're about to, and cluster bombs, and they're about to give them fighter jets. They're training their fighter jet pilots right now. Why can't you just be happy with that?
Well, they are by proxy, they are by proxy, supported. So, what do you need? It's like a couple living together that want to get married. You are by proxy, already. You're living together.
It's funny. It's funny that you say that. The United States, they're like, you know what, Ukraine, we like you. We like you a lot. We can't just let you be in NATO right now. It's like if we're in the third quarter of a basketball game and we go, you know what, LeBron James is going to come in and play for us now.
Yeah.
We got LeBron on our team now. You can't do it in the middle of the game.
That's right.
So you're in the middle of a war. You can't just we're just going to be a member of NATO, because if they become a member of NATO, that means that Russia is at war with NATO.
That's right.
And
that's right.
that includes nuclear capable countries.
That's
and
right.
that puts the whole thing on a different level.
Yeah, it changes the whole, changes everything.
You can't just jump in, in the middle and say, look, the United States now has to fight for us. Look, all of Europe now has to fight for us. So they say, listen, we'll think about it. We'll think about it, but you got to finish up your war first before we can do anything. And of course, Russia is like, they're saying, well, look at this. You see, NATO's not seeing eye to eye. They're not seeing eye to eye. They're on different sides.
It will partly justify the whole side for Russia, saying, see, we told you.
Yeah, we told you.
Going to happen.
And there was an interesting story, Dan, that came out. Now, here's a feel-good story in the middle of this war. The war's going on. People are dying. Bombs are dropping. Even now, they're shooting missiles. Like just the other day, they shot a whole group of missiles. A young boy in the Ukraine gave his heart to a girl. And when I say gave his heart to a girl, I mean he really gave his heart to a girl. A 4-year-old patient who was deemed brain dead from an aneurysm, gave his heart to a 6-year-old dying girl who was in need in the Ukraine in the middle of all these bombs and missiles. They transplanted a heart in the Ukraine. And so far, so good. So far, so good. It's working out. She's accepted the heart. Her body has accepted the heart, rather. For the first time in the Ukraine, they have done an operation like this on someone this young. The interesting picture they had a picture of the mother of the young boy who died, standing next to the bed of the girl who received her son's heart and listening to the heartbeat. And she said it's the first time she smiled sincerely and listening to her son's heartbeat again. So I just thought that was a fascinating story coming out of the Ukraine.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine? It's interesting, Dan. In Ukraine, they bring patients down to this specially equipped bomb shelter to do operations.
I know, it's so crazy right now.
So because the operation can't be stopped. You can't start a heart transplant and stop it. So they bring them down. They wait for all the sirens to die down, all the the early warning sirens to stop, and then they start the operation in a bomb shelter.
Yeah. I mean, you can't even have an abrupt electrical outage or anything like that. I mean, it's devastating. So
I know. I mean, isn't it incredible, though? They did a heart transplant on a 6-year-old girl in the middle of a war.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought that was just an amazing story. Speaking of amazing stories, though, Dan,
you can appreciate how difficult that is.
I just can't imagine. I mean, I'm just thinking about it. It reminds me of that show MASH, when they're operating and bombs are blowing up around them. I mean, I'm sure that's not the case, but speaking of exciting, interesting news, we're going to move over to space news, which I know you love space news, Dan. India, of all countries, India looks like they may be the 4th country to put a spacecraft on the moon. This week, India lifted off to the moon. Chandrayaan, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Chandrayaan-3, the rocket, which translates to moon vehicle. Upwards of 1 million people turned out to watch this on YouTube as the unmanned ship is due to reach the moon softly in a landing, hopefully not crashing, in the next couple of weeks.
I'm a little bit surprised it took India that long. Well, India probably thought, there's really no reason to go there. But
why did we go to the moon? What is not to the moon? Actually, this is not true. India, that was a horrible impression of an Indian person, by the way. They tried this once before. In 2019, they tried to send a ship to the moon, which I think we even reported on, and it did not go very well. That ship did not do well. And they actually tried in 2008. They actually went to the moon, circled the moon a few times, and then purposely crashed the ship on the surface of the moon. So actually, this is number 3 that they are on, and they plan to land on the surface of the moon, something that only the U.S., Russia, and China has done. They've been working on this supposedly for 60 years, and it will carry a land rover and wheel around and collect data and do experiments on the moon, whatever there is to experiment on the moon. You know what? India also has a plan to go to Venus. I didn't know that.
Oh, wow.
They're going to go to Venus. There's only one country. There's only one country that's ever landed on Venus, and that's Russia. And they landed on, and the ship only lasted several minutes because it's really hot on Venus.
That's right. Yeah.
It's really, really hot. So the ship kind of burned up, but they got some data back from Venus before their ship burned up there.
I met a guy a long time ago in Hawaii that apparently he was one of the engineers that worked on the landing modules for the U.S. ship. He's actually in jail now for selling secrets to China. But anyway, he was trying to explain to me how difficult it is to land something on the moon, and I could not even comprehend.
I mean, I'm sure. I'm sure. Yeah, I can't even imagine. Yeah. China has a plan right now, 2030, to land people on the moon. They're going to send a crew to the moon. Wow. They have announced they have a ship that's ready to go. They revealed their plans just this past week, actually, at the Aerospace Summit. And you know where the Aerospace Summit was? Wuhan, which I think is kind of ironic in a way.
No, don't go there.
So anyway, the Chinese have a plan to build a lunar research station. And open a restaurant and a gambling center. No, that's not true. So they will use their rockets, their new rockets for the lander.
They will go up on lunar viruses. We're okay.
Yeah, we do not want to put viruses on the moon.
Not bring lunar viruses and bats down here.
But when they first had this plan, President Xi said that the space dream is part of the dream to make China make China stronger, and so they're going to make China stronger by putting a space station. I don't know. This sounds kind of precarious to me, but anyway.
So back to the moon now. Okay.
Back to the moon. Because we don't have enough space here on the United States. Actually, that might be true, especially, and I wanted to get this story in because Dan is in South Korea. There is an interesting story coming out of South Korea this week based on space, not space in the outside of the world, but just space, that they have nearly closed nearly a quarter of all the child care centers in Korea. Why? Because people aren't having children very much anymore. However, they are building homes for the aged. In 2017, there were 40,000 child care facilities now, and now there are just over 30,000. Meanwhile, homes for the ages is booming. They're going from 76,000 to near 90,000 in the same period. Korea has one of the fastest aging populations and one of the lowest birth rates in the world right now.
Yeah, this was a subject of discussion over 10 years ago when I was here. It was especially so for the foreign English teachers that were coming into Korea, because I think we probably have I don't know the statistics, but I'm sure we have one of the largest population of English teachers here. From America and English-speaking countries, and this was a large issue back then with the declining child rate. That all of these English teachers that have been here for the past 10 years are going to have to find a new job and move on because just basically the child population is waning so much that even the English schools are going to be closing down, and it's already happening.
And they'll give you money. The government there has incentives to give you money to have a baby. If you will just have a baby, boost their population. But it's goodbye child centers there and elderly homes because people are just living very long in Korea right now, longer and longer, and they're continuing to live longer.
We have some of the best healthcare in the world, I think, as far as affordable as well. The universal healthcare here in Korea is just unreal. I've been all over the world, and I just can't talk enough about it. It's unreal.
It is kind of ironic though that South Korea has, and really do, they actually have, I've read this several times, that they have some of the best healthcare in the world, yet North Korea has the worst.
You can't. There's two things that you can't not see if you're walking down the street in Korea: is a medical center and a carom billiards room. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. It's really. They're like
I knew it, Dan. Dan had to bring that up. Oh, and there's Carom Builder's room.
No, it's we have 38,000 carom rooms here.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, 38,000. More than 10% of the population.
It's like a pool table for every person.
There's like 5.5 million carom players here, so it's kind of big.
So if you want to play, if you want to be old and you want to play carom, go to Korea. That is the place to be right now for old people. But what you need to do, if you want to have a baby, go to Korea because they need babies right now. In Korea, speaking of babies, Korea has had some rain recently. I know there's some stuff going on from rain. So we're going to get into our environmental news, Hal. But before we get into the environmental news, I wanted to talk a story that's going on in Kenya. In Kenya, this came up this week that 10 lions were killed by goat herders. They speared them because they had come into their village and were killing and eating the goats. And one of these lions that was killed was 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, which is the oldest living lion in that area at 19, because it's very rare that lions would live to be past the age of 15. The tourism ministry has put out a call to local herders, please do not kill the lions. We will come out and help you with the lions. Just please contact the Kenyan Wildlife Service and we will come out and help you. So why are lions coming out of the protected animal parks where they are protected and coming into more and more contact with people? And that is because, Dan, of a 40-year drought.
That's right.
And that's one of the main reasons that lions are starving. And there's no food in the protected areas anymore because of the drought. So when there's no food in your area, but there's goats right over the hill, what do you think the lions are going to do?
Yeah.
They're going to venture over.
A lot of the hunting goes on near where the water's at, where the animals come to drink. That's where the lions go hunt.
Yeah. I mean, if there's some goats that are if I got to spend the next couple of days trying to chase down a gazelle and I'm starving, and they're over across the hill, there's a bunch of goats in a pen that can't run anywhere. I'm gonna be having goat for dinner.
Yeah.
Why not? And then maybe along the way, I'll eat one of the herders that's throwing spears at me. But there's a problem right now. I mean, we've been talking about this for weeks, but Italy this week had a red alert warning for 16 cities due to the extreme heat, and a red alert indicates it's dangerous for the most healthy people. Because it is just too hot. That means that the large tourist spots in Italy, they're going to be shut down. The ESA, which is the European Space Agency, says that Italy, Spain, France, Germany, and Poland are looking at major heat waves in the next few weeks. That it's really slamming into Europe. Greece hit 40. They had to close down the Acropolis, one of the big tourist things here. The Czech Republic, where it never really gets that hot, hit 38 degrees, which is the highest that country's ever gotten. And the jet stream is bringing heavy rains to the UK. There's just it's just heat waves going everywhere. They're all over the place.
There's a lot of flooding there right now, isn't there, in the Philippines? Yeah.
Well, I mean, is there flooding in the Philippines?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
There's flooding there right now.
All the time. It's funny. I was I went to the airport the other day down in Cebu, and we had to bypass a river, which was also known as the SRP highway. So yes, I mean, the Philippines has floods all the time. We're just kind of used to it here, but a lot of places are not. There's so much because of the change in the jet stream. I mean, the UK has been slammed with rain. So you're either getting rained on or you're having a drought. It's just the whole thing is screwed up. In Italy, they name their heat waves in Italy. The current one is called Cerberus. after the three-headed monster from Dante's Inferno. And the upcoming one that they know that's going to happen is going to be called Charon, the ferryman who delivers your soul from the underworld in Greek mythology.
Sirius is the gatekeeper of the entrance to hell. Of the underworld.
Meanwhile, in America, a third of all Americans are under a heat advisory right now.
Yeah.
So a third of Americans. So that's 110 million people are under heat advisory. Korea supposedly having massive flooding now because of torrential rains going on in Korea.
Yeah, Changcheong district. There's a bit of urgency right now because a bunch of people are missing. A bunch of people, they found bodies. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, which is kind of not really common here. I mean, to have death disaster and floods here is not that common. So this is a big deal. Even though, in other countries that may be common, here it's a lot of people dying of floods and, being wiped out is not really that common here because, the infrastructure here is pretty well maintained. So that's a big deal right now. We're experiencing huge floods over here.
I know. Enough for it to make it into the international news. If Korea is having floods to the point where they're in the international news. Yeah. It's interesting, Dan, in India right now, they're having a tomato crisis. Indian food is really based around, curry and tomatoes. That's one of the main ingredients. And because of these temperature changes and the incredible heavy rains, tomatoes are now up 400%. A kilo of tomatoes goes around for 27 rupees, which is about 15 to 20 pesos. And now it's 138 rupees, almost 100 pesos. Tomatoes are almost in every dish here. People right now don't know what to cook because they don't have any tomatoes. And supposedly, it's gotten violent. Even McDonald's doesn't have tomatoes. People going into McDonald's store, the McDonald's like, hey, we don't have tomatoes. But there is violence right now in the streets. People robbing stores for their tomatoes.
Wow. Big money in tomatoes right now.
Big money in tomatoes. If I had known, I would have stocked up on the tomatoes and moved to India because they are up 400% because of the weird temperature changes and things that are going on around the world. I mean, it's over
here it's lettuce and cabbage.
Cabbage.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that are in crisis right now, and this is one of those things that really annoys me, Dan, is Hollywood is in the middle of a crisis right now.
Oh God, Hollywood crisis.
I know. This is big news. A lot of comedy shows where I get my news from have been off the air for the last couple of months because of the writer's strike. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because two Filipinos asked me about this. So if you don't know much about this, if you watch American shows, you'll notice there haven't been American shows on lately. They're doing repeats now because there's a writer's strike. The writers union is going on strike. And why are they on strike? What else? Money. They want more money. The new formats for releasing shows on streaming networks have, left the writers out. And the writers are like, hey, what about us? We write these shows and now you're streaming them. And what about AI? These new AI programs that are able to write the show for you based on what we wrote. So the AI looks at previous shows and then they write another show based on us. So what's protecting us? But the interesting thing, Dan, I want to get your take on this. Before, the writers, all right, the writers are not coming to work. It's all right. We're still in production. But now something this week happened and productions have shut down because now the actors are on strike. And I know what you're saying, Dan. Why are the actors on strike? Because Hollywood actors make so much money. They are, oh my God, money. But what's interesting is there's only a few actors in Hollywood that really make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Everybody else doesn't really make that much money. So it's mostly about those actors. Those actors now that kind of walk around, maybe have a line or two or in a crowd scene. And those people, they want money because they're walking around and they're getting paid for a movie, and then that movie goes to streaming and they get nothing. Before, before actors could make a lot of money because they would get money, residuals, and then that money, that show would go into, they would start showing it, repeats of it on television, and they would get money every time there's a repeat on television. Yeah. But streaming is not that. And now that Netflix has come out and all these other places, and they just stream it, nobody watches TV anymore. So, and here's the other problem, Dan. Here's the other problem. Now, let me add, what do you think of this? Is the problem now is that Hollywood is saying, if you're in a scene, if you're in a big crowd scene, in a big war scene, and we take a sample of your face, we can use your face in another movie, in another war scene, and we don't have to pay you.
They do that.
And so the actors are like, wait.
There's just so many variables here. Like, the AI has actually opened up a Pandora's box, first of all. And then this is all the ripple effects. I mean, it's all the way to the Starbucks guy that wants a 20% tip because, I ground your coffee. Like, this is like, everything's like, went on a tangent, and it's on this huge trend. Everybody wants my piece, but with the writers, I think it's a little bit justified. And with streaming coming out, streaming. I mean, why is only one corporation or only a small group of people getting all the benefits of the streaming?
I know.
What about the guy that invented streaming?
I mean, the thing is, and I understand where they're coming from because they're looking at it, and the places like the movie production places are like, oh, we're so poor, we're out of money. How do we can't pay everybody? Yeah. And they're like, why are you paying your CEOs $100 million a year? Right. Wait a minute, and we're only making you're making 20 cents per episode, and the thing that I think is really fascinating is the technology. Is like a writer can come in and write season 1. And then all the company has to do is to stick AI on season 1, and then AI writes the next 4 seasons for them. You don't need writers anymore. You just need them for one season. So, I mean, I see where they're coming from.
Is that what is that? I mean, for the guy that came up with the original idea, is that I mean, is that theft? It's just kind of
I don't know. And if I'm in a big war scene and you sample my face and then put my face in another scene, like, in 2 years, that's in some other movie, that shouldn't I get paid for that? I mean, maybe.
But all they'd have to do is use AI again and recreate a face that looks kind of like yours.
Kind of like you.
Right?
Like Ed Sheeran takes a song and he just kind of makes it sort of like another song. I mean, that's actually not true about Ed Sheeran. But
because, we changed the eyes, whatever.
Yeah, well, no. This guy in this movie has blue eyes. You have brown eyes. But it's but there's no end in sight right now. There is no end in sight. Everybody has left the table. Nobody is talking. No actors are coming to work. No writers are coming to work. The thing is, you can still do a movie production out of the country. So you can still, and not be in the union. So you can be in the union and still do a movie in Europe or in China or wherever. You just can't do a movie in the United States right now. And right now they're just having to continually keep running repeats and old movies and so forth because nothing new is going to be coming out.
That's right. I mean, and it's a crisis.
It is. It's a crisis.
I guess.
What are we going to do?
What are we going to do?
So anyway, things are changing. They're not like we were when we were kids. And it's true. When actors were, when I was younger, you do a television show and then that show goes into syndication and you become a millionaire. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. That doesn't happen anymore. Shows don't go into syndicate. They just sell them off to streaming services.
That's right.
And then, they get, very little or almost nothing from that. So long gone are the days where, some of these actors, these childhood actors who are still rich, even though they haven't done a show in 30 years, they're rich because they're in syndication. But because nobody watches TV anymore, that's becoming, they're like, wait a minute, how are we going to get paid later in life? So that was the way it was when I was growing up. Now, speaking of this, Dan, I want to get to this before we run out of time here. I want to talk a little bit about this one subject because it's become a big subject in the United States, as it's always been. And it goes back to my childhood, Dan. I get a chance to talk about my childhood when I was growing up in the U.S., in the southern United States. And we had a way in the U.S., especially in where I grew up, of referring to people of different races.
Okay.
So here we go. I know I'm teetering on a very thin line right now.
Whoa, watch out. Let's be careful.
In our town back then, black people, in our town, black people lived on the north side and white people lived on the south side. That's the way it was. It's just kind of the way it was. And that was known as Colored Town because that's where the colored people lived. And the word colored was used to describe black people at the time. Now, we had another word that we also used. It starts with the letter N, which it's now called the N word, which we don't really use that anymore. But, first of all, if you're not in the United States, the term colored people, it doesn't really make much sense to describe black people. I mean, colored people literally, we're all colored people. I mean, really, describes everyone. Honestly, black people, I find this funny. Black people are really not, most of them are really not black. They're really brown. And Asian people are really not yellow. They're really brown. Indian people from the United States are really not red. I mean, that's what that's what the United States.
People are not white. They're
That's
pink.
what we did. White people really aren't white. In fact, most white people, they want to be brown. So, which I think is hilarious.
White.
But anyway, around the late, in the 70s, I would say the early 70s, the black community was like, hey, don't say the term colored people anymore. It sounds racist. And so people stopped using that term because it kind of sounds racist. It really does. But last week, a Republican from Congress who was on the House floor giving a speech, he let one slip out. And the Republican from Arizona was introducing an amendment that would make it so the military doesn't have to pick people of race, which was teetering on being racist anyway, when he said, this has nothing to do on whether colored people or black people can serve in the military. Now, first of all, colored people and black people are the same. Secondly, he said black people because he just realized that he stepped in his own poop, basically, by saying that. And third, when you slip up and say something like, well, colored people, that means that you probably use that term all the time.
Sure.
Because you still must be using it. So, what it brings to light and what this is a big news story about is that racism is just as big as it was back in the 50s and 60s. It's still going on in the United States. The black people are still on one side of town and the white people are still on the other side of town. It's gotten better, but still, when a congressperson giving a speech on the House floor goes, well, the colored people, oh, wait a minute, I mean the black people.
That's the definition of institutionalized.
Yes.
It's institutionalized.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not going to change immediately, or even some of it's never going to change in some people. And that's individually, what can we say about that? I
mean, we really thought because of all the, people getting canceled and so forth. And, you say anything at all. But honestly, in the last, I'd say 6 years, the United States has really kind of almost taken a big step backwards. So I think, 6 years ago, if you had said colored people on the House floor in Congress, that would have been the end of you. But now it's like, oh, he just slipped up. What do you mean he just slipped up?
Yeah. I mean, has it though? I mean, it's always been there. It just hasn't been, out mainstream. So
it took a C-SPAN to catch it on television, and now it's all over television.
It's gone backwards, or the exposure's gotten better.
And what I find fascinating, Dan, I'd love to get your take on this. The Republicans, the reason that this even came up is they were doing a rule in the military to say that the military, the military has certain standards that they have to go by. They have to, they can't just get white people to be soldiers. They have to get, people of all races to be in all the different positions. There has to be certain lieutenants and captains and generals have to be black and Asian. And okay, I understand that. I mean, we need to have a diversified military. And this bill that they're proposing would take that away. Which is what they've recently, we're talking about this, taking this away from the schools. But what's interesting about this, it also leaves the fact that enlisted women, if you're in the Army and you get pregnant, you cannot file for a leave to go get an abortion. So if you're in the state of Texas, let's say, which now bans abortion because of the Supreme Court ruling, you can't leave your barracks or apply for leave to go get an abortion somewhere. You have to, the military will not grant you a leave to do that. That's part of what this bill has, which is, the Republicans are really using the military, it seems like, to get a lot of these, partisan issues, pushed into the military, which is what they're trying to say. Well, we're trying to make the military nonpartisan, but in doing so,
that's right. So,
aren't they just doing the opposite?
But I think that's been happening in all sorts of different subjects as well, anyway. And, separation of church and state, separation of that with the military as well. It's all been, it's just, it's just being brought up as talking points and used as weight for one side against the other. Right? So,
I mean, in Florida, they're banning books that we've been reading for 100 years because there is a mention of a homosexual in the book.
Right. I mean, when they started banning Steinbeck and Ray Bradbury and all of that, Fahrenheit 451, I don't know if you ever read that book, but, that's it's just ridiculous.
I just wanted to see what the take was, because I've had this conversation with some Filipinos this week, because it's hard to understand if you're living in the Philippines. It's hard to understand when you say, when someone says colored people, like, why do they call them colored people? I'm like, well, you know what? I don't really know. I don't know how that got started. But why is it, why is it so bad to say, they say this and to say that? And it's kind of hard to explain because you have to go back, 100 years and explain why these terms are, racist in America and why, there's such a divide.
It's funny you should mention that in the Philippines, because when Philippines ask me where I'm from and I tell them America, they're like, oh, you're half. And I'm like, what does that mean? I'm American. I'm from America. They're like, oh, so you're half. I'm like,
yeah, I know.
Okay,
it's so weird.
I don't know what that means.
Because we expect Americans to be white. Americans are white.
Right.
That's what we expect. Right. Even though Americans really are not white at all. If you look at the American Indian that was there in the first place, they're really brown, not red. They're brown, which I find hilarious.
Native Americans. Yeah, I mean, I have to go through that conversation quite a lot when I'm in the Philippines as well. And not just Philippines, but other countries as well. But I tell them I'm American. They're like, no, where are you really from?
Yeah. Like, where are you really from?
Yeah, I'm from
and you have to say, well, my great grandfather was from Korea, whatever. Which is interesting. But the funny thing is that in America, the people of America still look at Asians as, you're from another country. You're our guest. It's like, no, my family's lived here for 70 years. Yeah, well, you're still our guest.
Oh, the term I use a lot is, bro, I was American before you were born.
I was American before you were born.
But I have to throw in age there. It's like, well, I was American before you were born.
Yeah. I mean, it's just it's just so funny that this is, it's like I said, it's never ending, and it's all been stirred up again this week, and now the news is talking about it again. It's all coming back. The racism of the United States.
Sure.
So as the United States tries so hard to take 2 steps forward, it takes 4 steps back this week.
There's no more creativity
in the U.S. Congress. But for speaking of taking a couple of steps back, Dan and I have taken some steps back out of the show because we are running out of time. But we've had a wonderful show, got through so many subjects this week. So for me, Eric Lecain, and Dan Kang here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday evening with us. And Dan and I will be back again next week. So everybody, please be safe out there, and we will see you next week.
The views and comments of the hosts and guests